can do item B, but if not, we will just close there. So with that, we'll just start with the report from Mr. Thompson on our upcoming legislative session.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you.
We are live, Madam Chair. We are live.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, we're coming up on what will be a really weird session, coming sort of the first, hopefully normal one post-pandemic, or sort of normal. There still remains a number of questions that the legislature is considering on whether to go back to the old ways they used to do it, where they had in-person stuff, or if they leave the sort of hybrid approach where people might be live in the committee room, but they would still permit public testimony on Zoom. I think there are folks out there who believe that by having that Zoom option available, it gives more people access to the process. I guess before I talk about the session specifically, I'll talk about where we are right now. What they're talking about in terms of revenue to the state, the governor at a meeting I was in the other day said, yeah, we used to think we were going to have $2.5 billion extra, but now we think we'll have $4 billion. So there's quite a bit of debate on what to do with that large budget surplus. Obviously a lot will depend on what happens in the election, on if the governor is reelected, what happens in the House races, et cetera. But I think in general, they're already starting to talk about some kind of tax relief at the gross receipts tax level. We always have to pay attention to that stuff because it affects us. We get a portion of the gross receipts tax. And then also maybe some middle income tax relief. And then what they're talking about is growing government. So $8 billion by 10%, that would be another 800 million. And then they think that the tax cuts will cost about $1 billion. So you can see there's still a couple of $1 billion left. So the things they're talking about are things that would not create a recurring obligation beyond maintenance. So maybe they build a building or something, but they're not going out and hiring a bunch of additional FTE. So they're starting to have people examine it. And where that gets interesting for us is in the context of large projects, where there might be a possibility for us to go secure a significant amount of money. In the past, we've always tried to compete to secure individual discretionary capital outlay. And then we've also always tried to have a statewide that we ran through the governor's portal or some other place. So I think it's going to be, there may even be this third opportunity of this non-recurring general fund pile that maybe isn't decided exclusively by the governor or exclusively by the legislature. So that's something that we're trying to pay very, very close attention to right now. So depending on what happens in the election, I think will impact what we do as a city and as a team. I have a recommendation, Madam Chair, that I'd like to just throw out. It's above my pay grade, but I think it would be a good idea that, very close after the election, that we do an open house, or I'm not sure how we'd like to characterize it, but where we would have, key leadership from the city, council staff, department staff for the city, and we have like a new legislator, particularly Albuquerque area legislators, because we're guaranteed to have some new faces, sort of an orientation or an open house where it would really be for the benefit of these newly elected individuals to see, like, this is how city government does its thing. This is our connection with the community. This is how we normally interact with legislators. If you have constituent issues, these are the people you call. Something that would have value to these newly elected individuals. And it would also allow us then to start to get to know them better and start to have a healthy, normal relationship with them so we can help them do their very best. I think if we did something like that very close to after the the election, we would get a good participation. And, so I'll just leave it at that. I have some other ideas on how we could make that event really, really effective, particularly as it relates to capital projects, but I'll wait to get further instruction from leadership that it's something that you're interested in pursuing. So now that being said, when we get to Santa Fe, the primary area that I focus on is obviously capital outlay. Last year or 2 years ago, when they started the transparency stuff, that was a new wrinkle and a new challenge. We saw more and more reluctance from legislators to spend money outside of their legislative districts. So you started seeing just a more provincial way of looking at the world. And that was fine. It actually kind of helps us in some ways compete against other interests where they're way outside of folks' districts. But it's something we'll have to be mindful of going forward, is that it's inevitable that capital outlay, it's only a matter of time before the selections that legislators make would be politicized. So, we've always taken that as a challenge to us to make sure that we've got good projects that can be built on time, so the money isn't lying fallow, that are well planned. And that's something I think that I don't know of a municipality that does it better than the city of Albuquerque, honestly, at getting money, projects well planned and out the door. And that's a compliment to the council staff, the mayor's staff, everyone, and the mayor himself for his background from being the auditor and understanding how important it is not to waste money. That being said, every year they kind of change things a little bit. What we're hearing now is the next change that's coming is they're going to require us to have our projects uploaded onto the site well before the session. So that whole time frame when we normally would use us walking around the Capitol talking with legislators, those days are gone. I mean, I think we're going to have to walk into the session with a really good idea of what our projects are and who our prospective sponsors will be, our supporters, which moves our timeline up at least a month, if not two. Now, I can tell you from our past conversations that I'm heartened by the fact that our folks all seem willing and interested in doing that. And I will also report that in my conversations with Isaac Padilla last week, many of the things that we talked about in terms of eliminating the risk of duplications, sharing information, it sounds like we're tracking on all of those things so that it will be more effective and we'll have fewer instances of confusion from our legislative partners. So I feel very comfortable that we're not going to have some of those issues. I think the challenge for us, and the reason why I'm advocating for this open house, is because how can you expect a legislator to have a vision of what they want to do, an agenda of what they want to do before they're sworn in, So we're going to have some folks who will not be legislators till the opening day of the session. I'm not sure. Council service usually makes some accommodation for them to begin to maybe get a bill drafted or do some things, but they don't let them do everything that a legislator can do until they're sworn in. So we've got to find a way to bridge the gap so that we can transition with these new members. If we have let's say eight new Albuquerque legislators, that's a lot of folks that will need to, get up to speed. So I think that if we are organized properly, we'll be doing the legislators a favor and we'll put ourselves in a position where we're in the best possible place to compete for the community. I will also say that there's all sorts of talk about tax reform, stuff dealing with housing, stuff dealing with ways to invest in communities. Some of these are state programs. So I just feel like one of the natural outputs of all the money that's come from the feds and et cetera is that you're going to see all these new sort of proposals and plans for us to consider. So I think that we will also the IGR will have to be well organized as to how we collectively want to evaluate legislation as a threat or possibility for us. In the past couple of years, we haven't had as vigorous of an IGR during the session, and I think we've been fine with it because we haven't had a ton of bills that we had to collectively review. I don't think that will be the case in 23. I think there's going to be just about every idea you can imagine, and it stands to reason that some of those are going to be great for us and some of them are not going to be great. So hopefully we'll be able to refine how we're going to go about our bill review and all that during the session. And Madam Chair, I could continue to talk, but I just as soon stand for our questions or yield my time to someone else if you'd like.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that overview? Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to find the little caret so I can raise my hand. So, Mr. Thompson, you're saying that ideally, if we wanted to try to get ahead of everything, we would want to have, just so that we can make sure to report back, and I know Mr. Menicucci will be really good at this as well, but we would like to have our list of projects essentially finalized, ideally by early December.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And that is in keeping with what this group has already decided on. We had the end of last month as the deadline for that. I know we didn't get everybody's in, but that I think Mr. Menicucci has plans to meet with everybody individually this month. And so I don't see any problem having stuff by the end of October to start the process and then having it finalized by the end of November. Is that your thought, Mr. Menicucci?
Madam Chair, Councilor Bassan, yes. We have that myself, Mr. Hertz this week reached out to all the councilors or their analysts to schedule meetings before October 21st. We had a meeting with administration just now. They are, though, I think there's a little lot to talk, maybe item B. They're actually have their deadline by November 14th. And I think Mr. Padilla is here if he wants to talk on that real quickly about how we coordinate that in to get all the information in by early November.
Hello, members. Yeah, we're looking at November 14th as what we want to do is have our deadline so that there's enough time to get the information necessary to legislators, to everybody else. So that's what our goal is.
So that puts us, we were hoping to have a bill ready by November 7th to present to the IGR so that bill could move forward and get adopted before December 1st by the full council. But I think, I guess there might, and so I don't know if that's going to require that we move the IGR meeting up, or that maybe Mr. Padilla, the administration can have as much as something possible for the IGR bill to look at. I don't know how the IGR would want to proceed with that. We do have that continuity.
Members, what I think we could do is probably like have a draft bill ready to go, have some ideas in what the administration is looking at and what we want to push. But the 14th is like that's where we're targeted right now. I think that if we do get it done by the 14th, have the bill introduced on the 21st of November. If the council president's okay with a holdover, we could have that bill show up the first week of December, and we could still meet meet the deadlines and the different things that need to be done to make sure that we can be as effective as possible at the state.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on the state's situation? I know we're not going to be able to do the item B. Unfortunately, we just got Mr. Rael on, but now we've lost Councilor Bassan, and now we have Councilor Bassan back on. So, but let's go ahead and go with moving down to item C, just to.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just real quickly, I do apologize. Just so the committee knows, the technical team for coordinating all the capital outlay requests met just before this meeting. It's administration and council technical team, and we do look like we have a fairly good process in place to make sure this year that we have a coordinated system. We will all be, we'll have a spreadsheet on the share drive the technical team can access. We will be working to put everybody's requests on that application, both the administration and the cities, so we can look at it. And that way we don't end up duplicating. The other thing too is that Mr. Moscow felt that with that list and everybody getting things in onto that list, that will avoid their need to have to file duplicate forms like they had to do last year. The other thing is that the technical team will be meeting, I think by Mr. Patillo's advice, will be meeting as we close in probably every 2 weeks now going forward, as we close in on the session every week to make sure that all the information is flowing accurate and that we're keeping things processed. I think that's just kind of the main key. So hopefully that will assist with that situation and try to avoid that what's happened the last couple of years.
Thank you, Mr. Minicucci. I'm just going to real quickly, we have Chair Rael on now. So just to update you, we did not call the meeting to order because we did not have a quorum. So we've been discussing item A. If you would like to take over, we can call to order and do B if you'd like.
Counselor, if you wouldn't mind, I'm in a remote location as well. I don't have my agenda with me, so I would just love for you to keep going.
Okay. Well, now that we do have a quorum, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the October 4th meeting of the Intergovernmental Legislative Relations Committee. We had an informal session before this, just discussing the state lobbyist report and upcoming legislative session. And then I'm going to turn it to Mr. Thompson. He has a hand up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Rael. I guess there's just one last thing I would say, and that is there's so much money. We're going to have a new legislature. We're going to have new members. We may have a new governor, who knows? So we have to maintain a certain amount of flexibility. And while I really appreciate the fact that we are so far ahead of schedule, or it appears as if we're going to be ahead of schedule in terms of devising our capital projects, which I really appreciate, I think we have to be prepared for the fact that we may get a newly elected individual who says, this is my priority, this is what I want to do. And legislative prerogative has its place in the process. So I will be paying attention to those types of things. And if you hear something or anyone ever wants to discuss any of that, I think I'm totally open to it, because I do believe we will have a curveball here or there that we need to deal with collectively. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I do want to, now that we have at least a quorum here, I wanted to follow up on the suggestion from Mr. Thompson that we plan an open house kind of situation for legislators right after the election. I love that idea. I think it's a good idea to get to know new people, and it's also just a good idea to have some one-on-one FaceTime with existing legislators as well. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, this is Councilor Bassan. I like the idea. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my computer up and running, but I like the idea. I think it's great anytime we can communicate, whether it's individually or collectively, which in this case, I think collectively is going to be the best use of time for the legislators. But I'm supportive of it.
Thank you,
Madam
Councilor.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is Lawrence. I would agree as well. I think it's a good idea. I think it's really interesting. We've had receptions in the past, and I think both Joe and Isaac can relate to it. You know, when we have these open houses or receptions, it's kind of interesting how many show up and how many folks don't. But I think the idea is still to make the effort to do that, especially with, if we do have a lot of new legislators, just getting to know who they are is really important. So I know the mayor would be up for being part of that, I think, reception / open house. So we should work on that for sure.
So I'm thinking that we should start now planning this out, because the election's not that long away, having it perhaps the week after the election. So is that something that Mr. Minicucci, you could spearhead for us?
Yes, ma'am. We sure can. I'll work with Ms. Anaya, is that who we should work with in the mayor's office?
Yes, probably me.
And then with our director of council services, and we'll begin. I think Ms. Romero's here. She usually helps put those together, and we can go ahead and start finding a location and getting out the correct invites and everything. Proper thing.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to item B, which is the city council priorities. And I will turn it over to Mr. Minicucci.
Yes, Mr. Hertz, if you could put up the or Mr. Garrett or Cornelius, if you could put up the meeting staff reports. And while they're putting that up, basically we had the issue is that the state reports were due. All the state information was due to us for you all to be able to review by this meeting. Unfortunately, the only one we got back from the counselor, was information from Counselor Beavelcorn. I think part of that's not too unexpected because usually I think the counselors were used to, on the council side, I don't know about the administration side, they're used to council staff scheduling meetings with them and meeting with them face to face. And so I think I kind of dropped the ball on that. We had a little bit of a busy month, and so I think I let that slip. So we will recover and do it October. We have already made a outreach to all the counselors. We will meet with them. As you can see, Mr. Padilla is already working on getting together the administrative request and at least some structure of it. So we will be meeting with the counselors in the next couple of weeks, and we'll get their requests. We will be meeting, though, to get at the same time both the state and federal priorities for the counselors for our part. So that because come the next meeting, we will have to have ready both a resolution for both the state and federal priorities. So that would be for review at the next meeting. I think the other item I think we added on to that was, of course, we did meet with the intergovernmental team. Oh, I'm sorry, with that said, let me back up. That's not the other item. So Mr. If you could scroll down, whoever's controlling it, Garrett or Jeff, if you could scroll down. The other thing we wanted you to look at is one we need approval to extend. And I think I'll stop and Councilor Bassan, Madam Chair, Councilor Bassan has her hands up.
Yes, I was going to get to her when you were through, but was it something that we need to interrupt, Councilor Bassan?
Madam Chair, Mr. Minicucci, I thought we had discussed this. I'm sorry, as far as our priorities. So if we can get together, definitely, it was under my impression that we had already discussed District 4 priorities. So I would be happy to meet with you soon to figure all that out, please.
We will do. Okay, on that one there. So I apologize, Madam Chair. I don't have it down a record of it. Maybe we spoke informally and I should have written that down. So my apologies on that one. So what we scrolled down to is that Councilor Beavelcorn was kind enough to get us her priorities in, which allow us to do the format. What we did is we put them into the format that we use every year, and we just want to make sure because every year the committee, the IGR, likes to go through the format and make sure the format works for them. So what you have in your meeting staff report, meeting minutes, or in the staff report for the meeting, and what we have up here on the screen is the format. And Jeff or Garrett, if you continue to scroll down a little bit, it's divided into three things. One, district state, it'll be into projects for the district. Projects will be another form, will be projects citywide, and one will be our legislative ask. It will have the title in bold, like we do use every year. This will be an attachment to the resolution. The resolution, what the committee has worked out the last 4 years, is just basically a one-pager. It just says the state and the city and the federal government share common goals. And therefore we have identified priorities where we could work together and would like to enjoy the state legislature, or we enjoin the Congress, the congressional delegation to work with us towards these goals. And then we have the title, and then below that we just have a quick little description of kind of, it shows it's kind of one sentence where it combines both a brief description and kind of the intent. And so that's kind of the format we look at there. On that one, there is what we kind of have on the page. I think right there, and so that's kind of what we have to do. So we want to make sure that that's the two things: one, to give permission to extend the deadline, and then also if this is the format that works best for the committee going forward for this year.
Thanks, Mr. Minicucci. I assume that the format is acceptable to everybody, but if it's not, please speak up now. Otherwise, we'll just go with this. I think this was what we've done in the past, and it worked just fine. And then do we need a vote on the extension of the deadline, given that it's already come and gone and we didn't make it. So only Counselor Bassan and I got anything into you. So do we need an official vote on that?
Madam Chair, I think as long as I think in this committee, I would think it's probably a consensus. I think
Okay.
that it's all right to go.
All right, and I don't see anyone with trouble. So we're going to extend that deadline. We're going to keep the format. Mr. Cucci, if you could send this to me too. I just saw a couple of things that I would like to rephrase on mine.
Okay.
The translation on some of mine I'd like to change. So it will get that out to everyone, and then we will have the individual meetings with the other counselors. And then the new deadline is what day?
The new deadline for us to get them in, we hope to have everything collected for me and Jeff. So the deadline's for council on myself and Jeff. We hope to have everything collected by October 21st. And then we will go ahead that next week and develop legislation to submit in the committee to the committee in the staff report for the STEM to review. So it'll be for us October 21st. The administration, I think Padilla said that it's the November 14th, which is after the meeting, but he hopes, I think, he would have to have to us by like the 28th or so. We would need to get their basic framework so that we can put theirs in.
Perfect. And I don't see any hands. If you don't have to raise your hand, you can just come off mute if you have anything. You don't want to miss anybody. Okay. So let's move on to item C, which is a report from council staff.
And item C, okay, and I think, and actually I do apologize, I did a little bit of it, I think a few minutes ago in response to to follow up on what Mr. Thompson said, but basically I think earlier in the year, I think Mr. Padilla had provided and Councilor Pena had provided kind of an idea of getting together a joint staff committee. So we did put that together this week, this month, and we had our first meeting just a half hour before this meeting. And so we will be doing, I think we're recommended by the IGR to have a joint on the shared drive list of projects that are being submitted for capital outlay. Mr. Madden from CIP will be the master of that list. We will feed them to him. He will insert them so we have a certain record. If necessary, we can also add to it from council, at least certain members of the council staff, so it doesn't get too confusing. Myself, Ms. Romero, and Mr. Hertz will be able to add to it. As need be, it will be broken out by administration and then a tab for each counselor, each council district. That then we can make sure that we're not filling out duplicate forms. And so that should hopefully alleviate the duplicate issue. And like I said, we will be meeting weekly as we close in on the meeting. The staff, the technical team will, as we close in on the session, to make sure everything's flowing smoothly. We will also meet during the session to kind of keep that going. We will probably, since we are meeting, we'll probably find a few other tasks that we will include as they arise, that where we can help kind of keep the whole city process coordinated. One of the things we spoke about today was that if, and I think this is where I have to refer to Mr. Thompson, if they are allowing people to go back to the roundhouse or to the state capitol to start meeting with the legislators, historically, a lot of the councilors have sent up their analysts frequently. We work with Ms. Anaya to make sure that we have a coordination so that when our analysts are up there and when the administration team and Mr. Thompson know they're up there, and in turn the analysts know which members of the administration's lobbying team and Mr. Thompson where they're at, so that we can make sure that we're coordinated in that as the analysts lobby the legislators or the councilors do, that they have some knowledge of what the administration team's already lobbied them on, so we don't get some conflicts or confusion there. We would also on that one there, I think, and I think Mr. Thompson's back on, and Mr. Thompson, if you would like, I think also to make sure that the administration team can inform the analysts if they've tried to lobby or speak to the legislators about one of the councilors' projects to try to promote it, just kind of give them a briefing on what the work they've already done. So I think, Mr. Thompson, would you like to add to that? Because my understanding is there might be some changes up in the legislature this year on how.
Madam Chair and Mr. Minicucci, it's unknown. They feel like there may be restricted. It's just, we're gonna have to wait and see how the flu season and the rest of the pandemic happens, or whatever happens with that. And then the issue that Tom is nibbling at as it relates to how, as the city lobbyist, how I conduct myself. I try to never get in between a counselor and the mayor's office. So I have been very, very careful that, let's say a legislator asks me, hey, should I do this council project or should I do this mayor project? I just give them the information and let them decide. And so, and it's happened before with counselors being on opposite sides of the issue. I had one time I went in for a counselor and testified for a bill, and then 2 days later, another counselor asked me to testify against the same bill. So I learned my lesson in that episode, and it's never happened again. So, but the point is the whole reason for all this is that no one really needs to see us being disorganized or looking like we're not working together or we're not on the same page. And that's why I appreciate so much Mr. Padilla's and Mr. Mosco and Mr. Minicucci's work to try and make sure that we don't have dupes and the things that suggest that we're not all that well coordinated. Is that what you were looking for, Mr. Minicucci, or would you like more?
Yeah, I think that was the big question. That's exactly it. And but I think, I think you spoke to Mr. Romero that it might be, we have to be prepared too. We may not be able to, the staff may not be able, and the councils may not be able to get into the state capital this year. There may be some restrictions, and then we'll have to look at some plan option Bs on reaching out to legislatures.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McCutcheon. Mr. Thompson.
Madam Chair, is it okay if I say something? This is Isaac Padilla. Yep. What the mayor's always giving me direction on and giving all of us direction on is the most money we can bring back to the city benefits the city. So that's the way I approach it when we're in Santa Fe. Whatever a counselor needs, I'm more than happy to help. Whatever the mayor asks for, of course, I'm more than happy to help, but that's the direction that we get constantly from him. Whatever we can do to benefit the city, that's what I'm tasked to do.
Thank you for that, Mr. Padilla. I think that, I'm not gonna speak for others, but I think that most of the counselors are agreeing on that point. And, we just want to bring as much resources and good things back to Albuquerque as possible. So I'm personally really happy about the new process that I think is promising this year, and we'll see how it goes. But it's definitely already better than what I feel like we had last year. So continual improvement. Thank you for everybody's work on that. Anything else on item C?
No, ma'am.
All right. Let's move on to other business, and I apologize, Mr. Minicucci, but I'm not sure what the other business is, so I will turn it over to you.
We do have other business, but first we have a federal lobbyist report, Madam Chair, item D.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. It's not on the agenda that I have in front of me, but Mr. O'Donnell, please give us an update.
Or Mr. O'Donnell, you're muted.
Yeah.
It's probably better to do the report without being muted. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, I'll give you a brief report on what's going on here in Washington. So legislatively, let me say that the FY23 appropriations bill is, we didn't finish it as usual by September 30th. The continuing resolution goes to December 16th. There's, I think the hope is that they will finish this legislation before they go home for the Christmas recess. There is some thought that if the elections turn out in a certain way, there may be a reason why they don't want to finish this until January. So what does that do to the earmarks that are in the appropriations bill for the Senate, for the Senate and the House? The city has 8 earmarks in bills that have come out of both the Senate and the House. So my expectation is that if they finish this legislation, there'll be 8 earmarks total in the FY23 appropriations bills. The other major legislation that's pending is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's always important to New Mexico and to Albuquerque because the authorization sets funding levels for the military bases. That should get finished. There'll be pressure to finish that one before Christmas, and that's a must-do piece of legislation, so that will get done. There's also a more minor bill, but it's been related to both the appropriations and the National Defense Authorization Act, and it's called the Financial Transparency Act. And the bill was already approved in the House. It is pending. It's come out of the Senate, but it hasn't been attached to any legislation yet. And it could be either the defense bill or appropriations. The government finance officers, National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, all have opposed this legislation, not because of the transparency, but because what it would do is create a federal mandate for local governments and state governments to switch to one particular type of financial, reporting system, which basically, I think local governments and state governments probably don't have a problem with that in concept, but the problem is that you're going to have to go out and buy new software. So the organizations are opposing that, and I provided information to the city about that legislation. And I also notified the congressional delegation that local governments are not in favor of this legislation for that reason. I sent earlier this afternoon a summary. I sent one earlier, but I sent another one this afternoon about the Inflation Reduction Act, which you're all familiar with, that is passed. It has significant funding in there for climate and energy programs and for drought in the West. Although I think because that was pushed by Senators Padilla and Feinstein, there's sort of a California focus to that funding that's in the bill. But New Mexico may take some comfort in getting funds through the Bureau of Reclamation for the state and for local governments. I think that, the Water Resources Development Act. And I mention this because, Madam Chairman, you had an earmark request this past year for FY23 that was a stormwater project in your district. There is actually an earmark, and I don't count this as one of the 8 that I mentioned, but there's actually an earmark that Senator Heinrich included in the Energy and Water Bill, and it's under the Water Resources Development Act. There's a provision in there that for the Corps of Engineers to fund water resources projects. Flood control is one of the environmental infrastructure program areas where funding can be made available for projects. So the WRDA bill does 2 things. It is reauthorizing the Western Rural Water provision, which covers about 7 Western states, including New Mexico, and that's about a $535 million authorization. You have to get appropriations out of Congress to fund it, but there's an authorized funding level that large. The other thing is, we worked with the delegation and a number of New Mexico interests in central New Mexico, that's Sandoval, Bernalillo, and Valencia counties, to reauthorize what they call the Section 593 funding up to $100 million for water resources projects in those 3 county areas. So the Corps of Engineers for New Mexico has this one pot that has about $535 million for 6 Western states, some of it for New Mexico. And then there's this other pot of $100 million for water resources projects in the 3 areas. That legislation has passed the House, it's passed the Senate, and it's another one that needs to be finished before they end this session of Congress. So we're hopeful that bill is also going to get done. And to give you an idea about how, you talk about nonpartisan or partisanship in Washington. In the Senate, when this water resources bill passed in the Senate, the vote was 93-7 in favor of it. And the numbers on the House side, I don't have them on the top of my head, but it was rather similar. It was like over 300 members voted for it. So there's a lot of support because these projects are in congressional districts and in states. So it's very popular. I want to just mention a couple of things that I my colleague Joe Thompson mentioned, I think this idea of an open house is a good idea. Certainly, I would say, think about doing that same thing with the congressional delegation during the month of December. And I'm sure, I know most of you have opportunities at meetings or town halls, whatever they conduct, to have an opportunity to visit with them. And that's the time to talk a bit about the earmarks or the project and your earmarks and projects in your district. Finally, I'd say that I let Tom Menicucci know, and I talked to Greg Seeley about the fact that Kyriakis and I will be in Albuquerque on the 25th, 26th, and morning of the 27th of October. And I'm hoping at that time to check priorities and legislative priorities for this next session of Congress. And Madam Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Any questions, comments?
Madam Chair, I would just want to mention to John, you're looking mighty handsome, young man. Haven't seen you in a while, but I did want to ask you this question, John, or give you this bit of information. Both Senator Heinrich and Senator Lujan have scheduled appointments to meet with APD in particular to look at federal dollars on technology and technology for crime related issues. Mm-hmm. So we're meeting with Senator Heinrich on Friday, excuse me. And so I'll make sure that we keep you in the loop as it relates to whatever that comes up from those conversations. But they happen every once in a while. I just want to make sure that we're conveying that information to you, so as you're doing your work there, you're not getting information gaps of what they might know versus what you know in representing us in Washington.
Okay, Mr. Ailes, thank you for that information. Let me mention that this, and I've seen this, but because I've looked at the earmarks across the state of New Mexico, the ones that were put in the FY23 appropriations bills. And public safety is a very significant program area where the administration has, not the administration, the two senators have placed an emphasis. And in Albuquerque, I think there were about 3 or 4 of the earmarks that are in the public sector area. And I'll make a point of sending you what those are for your conversations with the two senators. I mean, they know it, they probably won't remember the details, but it's clear that the last 2 years, public safety has been a priority when they look to the appropriations bills.
Thank you. All right, I want to be cognizant of time because we did agree to have these monthly meetings, and I know that folks don't want them to go much over an hour. So moving on, unless I see any further questions. Other business?
Yes, Madam Chair, there is other business. It came in this morning. The Parks Department, and Mr. Simon's here from the Parks Department to present. You would have seen your emails came in around noon. A document that they have that they'd like to talk about in regards approaching the legislature for some legislation that the administration has been working on for several years regarding management of the Open Space Trust Fund. So, Madam Chair, it'd be up to you if you want to, like Mr. Simon to proceed.
Sure, Mr. Simon, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Tom for moving this issue forward quickly to the committee. As you all will probably recall, earlier this year, the council passed a resolution that established an Open Space Trust Fund committee, basically to assess and make recommendations regarding the administration of our Open Space Trust Fund, and particularly with how the city can get more bang for our buck out of this fund. The committee is comprised of representatives from the council staff, and the administration, as well as 2 representatives from the Open Space Advisory Board. So it's an intergovernmental council in a sense, also with some public members. The council's met several times already, and one of the first recommendations that this committee has made, which is captured in the letter to Mayor Keller and to the IGR, is a recommendation that the city pursue legislation at the state legislature next year that is similar to a bill that was introduced in the 2020 legislative session. That bill, which was carried at the time by Senator Jacob Candelaria, would have broadened the investment vehicle options for certain counties and cities in New Mexico, basically the largest ones, which manage some of their own investment funds. And of course, the city and Bernalillo County would fall into that category. So this legislation was proposed that would essentially let those qualifying cities and counties invest some of their assets into things that were different than fixed assets. So, bonds and things like that. The bill would have, if passed, would have allowed the city to invest some of its funds, including the Open Space Trust Fund, into equities, therefore, attempting to gain a greater return. The bill was, was introduced in the 2020 session. It was germane in that session. It was referred to 2 Senate committees. It cleared one and then ran out of time. At that Senate committee, there was one really substantive amendment that was made, which limited the portion of an investment fund that a qualifying municipality could invest in equities to 20% of that. So sort of a pretty low cap, on how much can be placed into potentially riskier assets. So in sum, the Open Space Trust Fund Committee believes we should pursue this matter again as one component of better managing the Open Space Trust Fund to benefit the citizens of Albuquerque, and has essentially requested the IGR to consider placing it on the city's legislative agenda for 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. I definitely love this bill and think that the city should be pushing it. Anybody have any questions on it or thoughts on adding it to our priorities list? There you go. You just thumbs up, Director Simon. I don't see anyone raising their hand. So I will say that from my end, I will for sure add this on to my legislative priorities for the priorities bill. And we'll see if folks have questions as it moves forward, but there you go. Councilor Bassan.
Madam Chair, do we need to approve this at is this something that's going to get added to what we approve here in IGR and then needs to be approved by the full council? Or is this something that we just agree upon? What's the proper channel to make sure that we add this?
So it's my understanding, and please, somebody who knows more than me, tell me if I'm wrong, but this would go into the priorities list that goes through this committee, and then it goes to full council for approval. So there'll be lots of steps along the way in case somebody has questions or concerns or just, wants to make any changes or anything like that.
Thank you. I'm glad to clarify and make sure that it's going in that same one.
Yeah. Mr. Griego.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add that, we have not figured out sponsors yet. Obviously, we're going to talk to our lobbying team, obviously, about that, just to make sure we think that through. And also, Joe Thompson, our lobbyist, is been invited to the next Open Space Committee to talk a little bit about broader strategy, but also to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how this will play out. We're still formalizing our state legislative strategy, and so obviously that'll when that gets more formalized, we'll be coming back to the committee with at least the major proposed legislative proposals.
Thank you. You can take it or leave it, but I do have some thoughts that on potential sponsors, if anybody would like to have that conversation offline. Okay. Anything else?
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
Just making sure there's nothing else first. No hands coming up. We got a move to adjourn. Anybody
just a-
second?
Just a thank you to the committee. We appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Director Simon. Okay, we've got a movement to adjourn and I'll second it. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for the patience and getting a quorum here, and we will see you next month.